In the final months of World War II, millions of Dutch civilians lived through one of the darkest humanitarian disasters in European history. The hunger winter, and when hope seemed impossible. A group of soldiers from a country thousands of miles away changed everything. The Netherlands had been under brutal German occupation for 5 long years. By 1944, food supplies collapsed. No fuel, no electricity, no crops. People were forced to eat tulip bulbs, boiled grass, or whatever they could find. Over 20,000 civilians would eventually die from starvation. The Dutch called this time Hongerswinter. The Hunger Winter. When the Allies liberated the southern Netherlands, the Germans responded by cutting off food shipments in the north. Trains were stopped. Roads were blocked. Rivers were mined. Cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague were sealed away, trapped. While British and American armies pushed towards Germany, it was the Canadian First Army that received a massive mission, liberate the Netherlands. A mission that would cost over 7,600 Canadian lives. To the starving Dutch, rumors spread. The Canadians are coming. But no one could imagine what the soldiers were about to do. In money tones, the Canadians were shocked. People were so hungry that they could barely stand. Children looked like skeletons. Families watched soldiers with eyes full of desperation. Canadian soldiers shared something they were trained never to give away: their own military rations. To Dutch civilians, it didn't feel real. Why would foreign soldiers, who didn't even know their names, give away their own food? Chocolate, biscuits, canned beef. These were luxuries Dutch families hadn't seen in years. And that moment created a bond that still exists today. In the final brutal winter of World War II, a nation was dying. The Netherlands, still under German occupation, was gripped by a catastrophic famine known as the Hunger Winter. The German occupiers had cut off all food and fuel supplies to the western provinces in retaliation for a railway strike. The result was a humanitarian disaster of unimaginable scale. By early 1945, the situation had reached a breaking point. The cities, once vibrant centers of life, became landscapes of despair. The daily ration plummeted to just a few hundred calories, consisting of little more than a slice of bread and a few potatoes. People were so desperate they resorted to eating tulip bulbs and sugar beets. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the rattling of handcarts carrying the dead. Hospitals were completely overwhelmed, running out of medicine, bandages, and even basic heating. Doctors could do little more than watch as their patients, weakened by months of starvation, succumbed to diseases like diphtheria and dysentery. People collapsed in the streets from sheer exhaustion and hunger. An estimated 20,000 civilians starved to death. Yet, despite the unimaginable suffering and the fact that the war was clearly lost, the German forces occupying the Netherlands refused to surrender. The Dutch people were trapped, with no hope in sight. Then, in the final days of April 1945, something extraordinary happened. A glimmer of hope appeared in the sky. It was the beginning of one of the most breathtaking and audacious humanitarian missions in history, Operation Manna. With the cautious approval of the German High Command, who feared a complete collapse of civil order, the Royal Air Force was given a narrow window to act. British and Canadian pilots, who had spent years flying these same skies on bombing runs, now embarked on a mission of mercy. They flew their massive Lancaster bombers at dangerously low altitudes, sometimes just a few hundred feet above the ground, over the starving cities of Rotterdam, The Hague, and Amsterdam. But this time their bomb bays were not filled with explosives. Instead of bombs, they dropped food. Imagine the scene on the ground. For months, the sound of aircraft had meant terror and destruction. People would run for cover, fearing the next explosion. But now, as the drone of the Lancasters grew louder, they looked up to see something miraculous. Thousands of parcels rained down from the sky. The Dutch people, skeletal and weak, ran into fields and streets, their eyes wide with disbelief. They tore open the packages to find treasures more precious than gold: bread, flour, powdered eggs, margarine, tins of meat, tea, and even chocolate. Bombas that once brought destruction were now bringing salvation. The cheers from the ground were so loud that the pilots could hear them over the roar of their own engines. It was a powerful, surreal moment of hope piercing through the darkness of war. Just a couple of days after Operation Manna began, the Americans joined the effort. Their mission was codenamed Operation Chowhound, flying their own fleet of B-17, flying fortress bombers. The U.S. Army Air Forces added their might to the unprecedented airlift. Together, Manna and Chowhound became the largest humanitarian airdrop in European history. For 10 days, Allied aircraft flew thousands of sorties, dropping over 11,000 tons of food to the desperate Dutch population. Pilots described seeing messages spelled out on the ground below them, crafted from tulips. "Thank you, boys, and many thanks." From the ruined streets and shattered homes, the Dutch people looked up and saw life-saving nourishment falling from the heavens. It was a profound symbol that the war was truly ending, and that the world had not forgotten them. While the airdrops provided immediate, life-saving relief, a more sustainable solution was needed on the ground. As the aerial operations continued, the 1st Canadian Army was pushing deeper into the western Netherlands, liberating town after town. These soldiers witnessed the horrific effects of the famine firsthand. Moved by the plight of the people, they did something remarkable. Canadian soldiers, already carrying heavy combat loads, packed their own rucksacks with extra rations. They went against regulations, sharing their personal food supplies with the starving civilians they encountered. They handed out biscuits, chocolate bars, and cans of bully beef like they were priceless treasures. For many Dutch families, a simple piece of chocolate from a Canadian soldier was the first real food they had eaten in months. The sight of soldiers giving their own food to mothers and children became an enduring image of compassion and liberation. The combined impact of the airdrops and the ground-level aid put immense pressure on the German command. In a rare and surprising moment of humanity amidst the chaos of a collapsing regime, the local German commanders in the Netherlands agreed to meet with Allied officers. The reason was simple. Even they could no longer stand to watch the civilian population starve to death before their eyes. On April 28th, a truce was negotiated, allowing Allied food convoys to enter the occupied territories by road and by water. A few days later, under the supervision of the Canadian Army, the first of hundreds of food trucks, painted white for visibility, rolled into the German-controlled zones. Civilians, many too weak to stand, lined the streets, weeping with joy and relief as the convoys passed. The hunger winter was finally over. This series of events, born from a desperate crisis, showcased a remarkable alliance of air and ground forces, and even a moment of understanding from the enemy, all to save a nation on the brink. This incredible story of Operation Manna and Operation Chowhound is a powerful testament to human compassion in the darkest of times. It shows that even in the midst of total war, the impulse to save lives can triumph over the drive to destroy. It's a chapter of World War II that is often overlooked but deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more hidden histories. We'll see you next time. The final battles were brutal, street-to-street fighting in cities like Groningen, Zwolle, and Arnhem. Snipers hidden in windows, mines buried in the roads. Every step forward was paid for in blood. But the Canadians refused to stop. They pushed on relentless, because they knew what was waiting just behind those German lines. Millions of people on the brink of starvation. And then came the moment the Dutch people would never, ever forget. As the last shots faded, Canadian soldiers, exhausted and battle-worn, did something extraordinary. They opened their own ration packs, their personal supply of food, and started handing it out directly to the starving civilians. Chocolate bars, tins of beef, biscuits, to a people who had been eating tulip bulbs to survive. This was a feast. You have to understand, to the Dutch, this wasn't just food. It was dignity. It was kindness. It was a powerful, tangible reminder that the world had not abandoned them. After years of darkness, cruelty, and hunger, here were strangers offering them everything they had. The relief was overwhelming. People cried openly in the streets, hugging these soldiers from a country thousands of miles away. It was a profound act of human connection in the ruins of war. In their diaries and letters home, many Canadian soldiers wrote about what they saw. One wrote simply, "They were so hungry, we had to do something." This wasn't an order from a general. No commander told them to share their rations. It was a spontaneous act of compassion, soldier by soldier, town by town. They saw suffering and they responded as human beings. It was that simple and that profound. This single act forged a bond that has lasted 4 generations. A friendship built not by politics or treaties, but by a shared moment of humanity in the midst of hardship. Every year, the Netherlands still honors Canada. The famous Tulip Festival in Ottawa. It started with a gift of 100,000 tulip bulbs from the Dutch royal family as a thank you. To this day, the Netherlands sends thousands of tulips to Canada's capital annually. Dutch schoolchildren tend the graves of fallen Canadian soldiers, lay flowers at memorials, and send paintings and letters to the few remaining veterans. It's a national promise to never forget. The Dutch remember the soldiers who fed them when the world turned dark. Canadian soldiers didn't just liberate a country, they restored hope, one meal at a time. And that is why, even today, you will hear Dutch civilians say with deep sincerity, "We will always remember the Canadians."